Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Dan Sullivan speaking. I'm the RVP for Condusiv Technology, focusing on our customers in the Eastern region. I wanted to thank everybody for joining today's webinar. We're excited to have our very valued partners joining us this afternoon to walk through what's new in Velocity 7.0 and Diskeeper 18. Condusiv patented I/O reduction software, and we're going to take you through a little bit of news about that and some areas of focus that folks like yourself have had some great success. But we've also spared no expense this afternoon, team, because we have both Gary Kwan, our Senior Vice President of Technology, on the line, and also Rick Cadruvi, our Chief Architect. GQ, I'll let you introduce yourself first, and then I'll move over to Rick.
Well, thank you, Dan, and glad to be here. You got both Rick and I, both from the technical area, and you'll hear Dan refer to me as GQ, and those are just easy initials to remember me by. Nothing about my lifestyle, because I'm a techie. I'm a techie at heart. So glad to be on the call here and with our resellers here. Thanks, Dan.
Good. Thanks, GQ. And Rick, both you and GQ have really some incredible longevity here with Condusiv and previous iterations of Condusiv. Might you take a few minutes here to introduce yourself to the folks?
Sure. This is Rick, and I've been around the organization since the beginning, pretty much. And I've known Gary longer than the company's been around doing software. We were actually both working on the research phase of global positioning satellites, and that's actually where I met Gary. And then when Craig Jensen, the owner of our company, decided to go off and found a software company, I went off with them, and then we hired Gary as one of the very first employees. So we've been doing this together for a very long time, and our focus since day one has been on storage performance in general, and storage performance software, and we continue, as you guys obviously know, the marketplace is changing drastically and always has. And our goal is to always stay out in front of it, be there before it gets there. So that's kind of what my role is to make sure that the next generation of our software always is better and always is doing something toward where the marketplace is headed, so that by the time it gets to a specific area, we're ready to handle it and give our customers the best performance they can imagine.
That's great, Rick. Thanks, and you have kept us there. And I'm excited to let the folks know that we'll actually be having Rick take us through a live demo of the latest releases of our software and some of our other features. So excited to have that occur today. Folks, not going to spend a lot of time here, but certainly many of you may know us as the Diskeeper Corporation in the past, and we rebranded the company and respun the technology, Gary and GQ, back in 2012 to really focus on preventing fragmentation from occurring in the Windows OS, no longer a defragmentation piece of software, but in doing so have driven just dramatic application performance improvements and significant I/O reduction for the thousands of customers that are using our software today. And the great thing, too, about it for you, our partners, as you'll learn later in the presentation, is there's some significant margin opportunities here for you around new business deal registrations to your existing customer base or new prospects. But as Gary and GQ, they didn't speak about years, but they've been here over 35 years. We're the 12th oldest software company in the world, and have really demonstrated significant leadership, as Rick has talked about, around the whole storage performance area and in I/O reduction. Most recently, besides being close partners with Microsoft and VMware, we were certified under a new program from Microsoft, and one of our key focus areas is SQL, but we certified under the SQL Server reliability certification. And GQ, I know you had a role in that. Do you want to speak briefly around that?
Yeah, Dan, and I consider this a very elite type of certification that we received here. And Microsoft has certain types of certification. In this case, it's being fully certified and compatible with SQL Server. Now, one of the things that I like to point out, we're the first software vendor to get this certification, but we're in very good company with hardware vendors like Dell, EMC, HP. So we're in good company. So not only did we have to go through some stringent tests, we also had to go in front of a board of Microsoft SQL experts. So this is a very nice certification that shows how well we work with SQL Server, Dan.
That's great, GQ, and congratulations to you, Rick, and the engineering team for getting us on there and for us being the first. So thank you for that. And I also, before I left this, just do want to mention to folks that one of our patented filter drivers is a caching engine that Rick developed, and it's patented, and it's incredibly smart and incredibly efficient. And to that end, folks, you see there that under the OEM banner like HP, Dell, Western Digital, SanDisk, and others actually OEM that from us. You won't see our name because they are putting their name on it, and they put it in their lower-end workbooks, but you could all appreciate just the testing that they put us through before they would, put us into their solution. So we're a rock-solid software product today, delivering incredible I/O reduction for thousands of customers across not only North America, but worldwide, and hope to demonstrate some of our newer features to you today. What we're really going to talk about today is what's new in Velocity 7.0 and Diskeeper 18. And there's some dramatic improvements that Rick and GQ and their teams have delivered in these latest releases. The first, which our customers have been finding incredibly beneficial, is that there no longer is a reboot required to install or upgrade our solution in existing environments. An incredible feat from Rick and his team. And Rick, do you want to speak a little bit about what you were able to accomplish there with our no reboot of the latest software?
Sure, Dan. So we have several filter drivers as a result of our software that do various kinds of things. Dan actually pointed toward the caching stuff. The idea is to be in the operating system at a level that allows us to reduce the overhead to the system and get a greater picture of what's going on in the I/O system. Well, a couple of those are actually sitting on the storage stack, not in mini filters. Microsoft years ago developed a mini filter manager for the file system and also for network drivers. So like your antivirus, anti-malware type software takes advantage of that. And we have some of those as well, but we needed to be at a level in the operating system that wasn't possible. So our software would require a reboot. We'd install the drivers, the filter drivers on top of the storage stack, and it would work just fine, but the customers would have to do a reboot, and that was a problem for the customers. Especially, we actually delayed for a long time. We knew how to deal with it, but we delayed it because we thought that Microsoft's requiring updates constantly would mean that people were rebooting on a regular schedule. Well, people weren't doing that, and especially in servers and other things. So eventually we said, look, we've got to help our customers and make it so that they can get our software on without having to reboot. So one of the development cycles this time is we took the time to build our own filter manager for the storage stack so we can insert and remove our software without having to have a reboot at all. So that's and that was, a fairly technical thing that we had to do. We actually had talked before to Microsoft about doing this, extending theirs, and they had decided that there weren't that many vendors doing that kind of stuff that it actually made sense. You can imagine with anti-malware how much that makes sense because everybody's installing that. But so we said, okay, well, we'll do it ourselves, and that's what we did. And it's not actually the first time we've done this. Years ago, when we were working in a different operating system, we did the same sort of thing. But yeah, so that's the backstory to the whole thing.
That's great, Gary. Thanks, and Rick, I really appreciate that update. And folks, I just have to tell you, I deal with any number of customers in any number of verticals. One of the other challenges, not only in general, horizontal applications, but in the healthcare world especially, it was very challenging for them to include us in their regularly scheduled updates. We've been updating and installing into new healthcare environments on the fly. Takes minutes to accomplish, and they just blink and say they can't believe that it's just so easy. So kudos again to Rick, to you and your team. We've also, and Rick and his team has also improved the benefits dashboard delivered earlier in Velocity 6.2 and Diskeeper 16, and Rick will share with you coming up here a view of that, but trying to demonstrate to our customers what the software is actually doing for them, not only around what I/O reduction and the amounts of that, but also storage time saved. And again, Rick will share that with you. There's some memory tuning alerts that have been added to the solution, and also you'll see that there's now a single pane that our customers can use to view all of their systems listed in their environment. And you can see, and Rick has used some color coding to demonstrate which servers could benefit from, let's say, getting additional memory to improve performance on them. So Rick will share that with you here in just a second. And I'm not going to read the quote here from Blake Smith at Christus Health, but Christus Health is one of the largest healthcare entities in the Texas area, one of the largest in the country, actually. While they have us on their Meditech environment, they also have us on a total of over 2,500 servers in their environment because of what we do around I/O reduction. And now you can see, as I mentioned, with this no reboot, how easy it is for them to upgrade hundreds of servers at a time. So really pretty special what we've accomplished. With that, Rick, I think I'm going to, stop talking here and turn it over to you to, take us through, what you've got to show from a live perspective around what our software is doing today. So I think you've got the ball, and I see your screens coming up. So there we go.
Okay.
And Rick and Dan, let me just interject here. There's a Q&A box over on the right-hand side, and we do like to make this interactive. So if you have any questions during the sessions, please put it in there and address it to everyone so we can all see it. And we'll get to your questions either during the sessions or at the end. Thanks. Thanks, Rick.
Thanks, GQ.
Okay, so I mentioned that we've been doing storage performance for quite a long time. So one of the things that and if you looked at that quote from Christus Health, you'll notice that one of the things that Blake talks about is that we do set it and forget it. And set it and forget it is indeed something we actually registered a trademark for set it and forget it years ago. And that has always been our emphasis, make it really easy. But the problem is, how do you present that to people? So for those of you who have been around our software for a while, you probably recognize, and I have to take credit or blame for this, that we don't do the best job in our UIs and stuff, and it comes from having been really set it and forget it. But one of the things we really tried to do in this version was listen to our customers, improve both the management console, the local UIs, and give them a greater sense of what's going on and make it easier to understand. So I'm going to just take a quick moment and walk through various things. We're going to start with the management console. This is the latest management console. One of the things that we have improved based on having listened to our customers is it used to be if you had a lot of systems, it could take a long time for management console to bring up the data. So one of the things that we did is we actually built a cache in at the management layer where we cache data coming in from the end nodes. Because one of the things we don't want to do is be a bad partner in the environment, in the ecosystem. So we try very hard not to create overhead. We try to make sure that we're not out there just blasting your network with requests and stuff all the time. So that's why we used to just query whenever you'd bring it up, because the idea is you're not living in our management console. You have other uses for your computers than Velocity and Diskeeper and whatever. So how do we deal with that? Well, to make it responsive, we have other reasons why once in a great while we have to bring data over to the management console, and so at that same time we piggyback the data and we cache it. So that's one of the improvements that makes it better. Another simple improvement is we just added tooltips for help. So you can click on help, you can get explanations. One of the things that we got for people was, well, what does IOs eliminated really mean? You know, what does storage IO time save? So we put some tooltips here so you could see what they mean, and then of course you can go to help, and the help has a much more extended. And we also built our help system for this one slightly differently, because you might be on a system that doesn't have access to the internet or can't access our particular website. If that's the case, you have built-in help. We ship help with the software. But if you do have access, we actually start by checking to see if we can do the online help. And we will start and default to online help. And what that means is that when you tell us that this explanation doesn't really work for you, it's not really helpful, you really need a better explanation, we can go and modify our online help and effectively get a quick upgrade without you having to do any upgrades in the field. And that's the same thing for both our console as well as our end node software. So they both do the same thing. If they can't access our website, then they'll use the local help, otherwise they will. So that's the main thing there. I'm going to quickly move for just a moment over and show you a Diskeeper screen. So obviously we probably use our own software. We have the same thing. I'm a developer, essentially. So I'm kind of a super user, but not necessarily a totally super user. What I find is, and I've got a pretty significant system, so when I go to the IO Performance tab, you'll notice that I've got 64 gigabytes of RAM on my this is my desktop. I'm doing this demo on my desktop. I've got a bunch of VMs running and other kinds of stuff. So I actually use our software because I find that my performance is significantly better just for my day-to-day stuff if I use it. So this is essentially the same dashboard. It's from Diskeeper as opposed to Velocity or VMC. In this, we've added some features to it. We've tried to make it better. One of the things that we had issues with before is we started getting customers that had a huge amount of data. The numbers started getting really large. You'll notice even on my desktop, and this has only been running since mid-May, I've already done a workload of 83 terabytes on my desktop. So, and I've actually satisfied from cache 3 terabytes of data on my system. And I do a lot of random I/O, so I get a lot of benefit from that. And one of the things I'm going to talk about in a couple of minutes is how we do that kind of, what we do in terms of caching and why that works so well without having to get a huge amount of data. So you say, well, what's 3 terabytes compared to 83 terabytes? Well, those 3 terabytes are getting in the way of, it's a lot of IOs, and they're small, more random IOs that are getting in the way of what you really want to do with your system. And so those are the kinds of things that we do. But the dashboard, we've just tried to make it a little more friendly. It has all of this. Another interesting thing that we did a previous version, but is very useful, is the analytics. One of the things that's really interesting, I've looked at this stuff for quite a while on a lot of different customer systems, And you actually can see when people do their work. It's really interesting when they're home users, or well, not home users, when they're workers at an end user site, you know, in a business, because you can see the hours of the day that they're actually doing something. You know, here you can see that things really start to accelerate for me in the afternoon. Don't tell my boss, but the throughput that I've got, again, you can see the scope of this kind of stuff. And the other interesting thing you can see from all of this is that when you look at this, you'll also notice that I/O time saved, I/O's eliminated, these kinds of things also tend to track the times when you're doing the greatest work. So that's one of the real big benefits of this analytics thing, is you can actually see that we're making a difference when you're doing the most amount of work, which is when you really care. So when your systems are relatively idle, it doesn't really matter. But when you're doing a lot of work, whether it's in the middle of the night because you're doing background processing, or if it's during the day when your end users are just in there doing all kinds of work, that's when you really want the performance, and that's really what we're really good at. So I'm going to move back to VMC here for a second. Now, one of the things that we did is in our system selections, there's a page here, and Dan already mentioned this. So we used to just give a couple of small pieces of information here. We've added some additional information in this tab, so you can see a lot more. These columns are all sortable. If I want to find the systems, so that's by smallest to largest. Now it's largest to smallest. So I can find the systems that have the greatest workload. I can find the systems that are getting the best performance based on our software, so you can customize. You know, we can look at things like system memory and how much memory is available, and those kinds of things. So you can make your selections. You know, if I've just got 3 systems up at the moment for this. So this is these 3 are selected, but it allows me to, if I were to have hundreds of, or even thousands like Blake has, I can go through and I can sort them in a certain area. We also added these system statuses, and this is really a memory status. And if I hover over these icons, I also get some information. This is telling me that there's insufficient memory for IntelliMemory. Here's a case where there's memory, but not quite enough. You really ought to consider making more memory available. And here's a system where there's more than adequate amount of memory. The software is operational. These will also show up as red for other reasons, and the tooltip is dynamic. It'll pop up and say, you have this issue. We're not running. We've got whatever's going on in the background. It'll give you some status if there's some kind of problem with the software on that end system to make it easier. The other thing you can do is download benefits, and it'll download a benefits file as a CSV, so you can just open it in Excel. And that has a lot more just the raw data. If you want to just hash the data, you know, modify or manipulate the data however you want to see what your benefits are. We added that. You can see down in my lower corner, I've already done that today. I can go and open the folder where it's at and pull that up. It downloads it according to your browser. I'm using Chrome in this case. If I were using Edge, it would actually come up and say save as. With Chrome, it just automatically defaults to your download location. Here's a sample of what that data looks like. You've got the name. You know, you can see there's a lot of additional data here that you can use and you can manipulate. And including one of the things that we put in for this particular version is we actually identify whether you're running SQL Server or not. Now, this is not that you're running SQL, because almost every system nowadays is running SQL Express. And the reason is essentially Microsoft's giving it away to developers, so everybody's using it as a background. If they have a small database or something for their applications, everybody uses SQL Express. We actually checked that it's really SQL Server, not SQL Express, and so we know that this particular system is running SQL Server, and we give that information. So if you want to do a little extra tuning, you can do that kind of thing. So that's kind of that part of it. And okay, so I'm going to stop the service for a second on one of my other machines, on this particular machine here, and I'm going to do it for a reason. I want to go back to VMC and show you some additional dashboard updates. So, oh, it's probably got a dash in it. So I just stopped our software by stopping the service. And then I'm going to go back here to VMC. I'm going to go to my primary screen. I'm going to cancel out of here. And I'm going to update my results. So update results is going to go out and query everything. And you see that indeed we noticed that there was a problem with accessing some of the systems. So this is all dynamic. It'll tell you that there's some kind of a problem. It gives you both the system error number and it tells you what that system error means. In this case, the system's not responding because the service is down. The service is what we communicate with. Let me go turn it back on. It'll take a second to come up. Start pending. Give it a minute. And we're back up, and as you can see, everything's perfectly fine. So we've tried to do some things in the console to make it easier for administrators to deal with our software and stuff. Like I said at the beginning, and I have to take credit or actually say that I'm the responsible party for the fact that we do performance software. We don't do UIs and whatever. Yes, we do them. They're part of our software, but we are trying to improve them. Dan's beating me up all the time, telling me that I've got to make it easier for the end user. So that's kind of one of the things that's there. So let me go now to this particular system. And on this particular system, if I go to the I/O Performance tab, you'll see that all of a sudden the data here turned red. I'm going to go down back to this system here and do the same thing. And you'll see that I have just normal colors. So we actually will display on the system in the local thing, we'll display some color coding to tell you that there's a memory issue. And of course, if I hover over the tooltip, you'll get some additional information. If I go to this particular one, and these are configured this way on purpose, obviously, for the sake of this of these demos. But in this particular case, it's yellow, and there's a warning to tell you that, you know, it is caching, but it's limited because of the fact that you really don't have enough memory on this particular system. You might want to consider doing something better. And I guess that's really, I've kind of come to the end of what I had prepared. Those are really the new things we're preparing. So.
No, thanks, Rick. That's a awesome overview of everything, and I can just tell you from a field perspective of how appreciative our both customers and prospects are when they even just a new person tries our software and being able, as you said, to demonstrate, you know, what the software is doing for them is truly a benefit for them. Appreciate your time and taking us through that. Thanks for all your efforts.
Okay, well, I'll give it back to you. And
fair enough.
There we go.
Thanks. And thanks, folks. I see some people are putting in some Q&As, which is great, and we'll get to those at the end. And one other thing that I failed to mention at the beginning is because of your attendance here today, each of you will be receiving a not-for-resale copy of both Velocity 7.0 and Diskeeper 18 for your use in testing and et cetera. So just make sure to look for that, you know, after the presentation's over. Rick talked a bit about SQL and even identifying whether something's a SQL server or not. SQL happens to be a really sweet spot for our patented I/O reduction software. Our marketing team and the technical teams do a number of surveys every year. This is the results of the most recent survey of over 1,000 technical folks out in the community. around, SQL Server and performance. So 28% say that SQL Server's performance is an issue for them, and that number actually has been climbing over the years that we've been doing these outreach to our technical team folks. So just wanted to share what people are saying about SQL, and quite frankly, 7 out of 10 of our new customers actually buy our patented I/O reduction software to help improve SQL performance. And we have some incredible case studies on our website around some of their success with that. So if your customers are having any issues with SQL, you really should reach out to us, and we'll give them some software to try and prove that the software will improve their performance. Just briefly, we're doing all of this around improving and streamlining I/O performance. This just depicts what the most efficient I/O would look like, of large contiguous writes emanating out of the Windows OS, hitting the hypervisor, moving down to storage, and back again. And what happens in a virtualized world is both the Windows I/O tax enter the picture, and you also get what Gartner has termed the I/O blender effect. And these two inefficiencies drive incredible performance issues for your environment down to underlying storage. Even if it's all flash, hyper-converged, et cetera, this has your systems running up to 50% slower than if the I/O profile looked like that. And this is what we do. We provide the most efficient I/O for your high-performance storage environments to use and mitigate a lot of the I/O, the tax that Windows creates, wanting to break up those nice, fat, contiguous writes into the small fragments, and then in a virtualized world, having the hypervisor further randomize those I/Os, giving you Gartner's term, the blender effect, which in effect increases latency and reduces storage performance. Where do we sit? A lot of times people ask, where do we install? So as Rick mentioned, we are 2 filter drivers that sit in the Windows OS, so we're above everything in your environment. So if it's compatible with Windows, it's compatible with us. And again, now, no reboot required. We can install in your customer or prospect's environment in just minutes and start optimizing immediately. So what does Velocity and Diskeeper do? Again, delivers large contiguous writes for more payload for every I/O that occurs. Our patented caching engine is at its 3rd iteration, uses idle DRAM 10 to 15 times faster than anything on the planet to cache hot read. You saw the benefit dashboard that shows you what the software is doing for you, and we guarantee to improve performance, or folks can have their money back, which I haven't had one yet do that. So we did talk about SQL also, and there's some best practices around how to tune for SQL. One is to give us enough DRAM so we can provide, our caching engine can provide the benefits that it does by caching those hot reads. SQL, as many of you know, will eat all the memory that you give it. It's like putting a kid in a candy store with a $100 bill. So by capping SQL, you'll allow us to have some DRAM to use to take advantage of our patented caching engine. And now our dashboard can show you just what is happening in your environment. We have a ton of examples of the benefits we've delivered to customers on our website, so please take advantage of it. We mentioned Christus Health here. Bell Mobility is the Verizon of Canada. They reduced their I/O to SAN by 61% for 3x faster SQL queries. Just significant performance improvements when you take a look at some of the results, folks. And here's some even more recent customer examples. Just one I'll highlight here is the University of Illinois. They installed us. They were a Diskeeper customer. They virtualized, as many and all are doing. So they added us into their brand new all-flash big server environment. And this is the results of a 72-hour benchmark. Before Velocity was installed, They took 4.5 hours on an Oracle database to process 1.5 petabytes of information, and it generated 13.9 million IOs to their all-flash environment. But look at this, 72 hours later, that same workload, instead of 4 hours, took 1 hour and 30 minutes to process. We actually processed another 0.5 terabyte of data in that hour and 30 minutes, and look at the difference in I/O to storage. You know, actual results, folks, if I told you this without seeing this, you know, you kind of say, what are you smoking, Dan? So really incredible results, and you can see and read here all the different examples of what folks are seeing. So from a partner standpoint, why do folks love to sell our software? It's easy. It's a real no bandwidth sell. Just add us to the bill of materials. And quite frankly, as I tell the partners that I work with, if you introduce us or me to one of your prospects or customers, I'll do all the work. If we need to, a systems engineer will be on the line to help us get installed. And there'll be nothing for you to do except collect the PO and the revenue. And I've demonstrated that time and time again, and that's so true of all of the folks that work for us. I mentioned you can earn up to 40 points of margin if you sell at list with our deal registration program. So the MSRP for a host-based license is $3,800. It's roughly $1,500 to you on a deal registration. So it's pretty significant. I just recently had a partner register a 100-host deal. So do the math on 100 hosts here at $1,500 a host. He's looking at, you know, $150,000 a margin here, and I'm doing a lot of the heavy lifting for him, as the SC is also. So a great deal for you folks to just deal reg our product. And the same is true both for Diskeeper and SSD Keeper, you know, focused on the workstation environment. And finally, people are loving us because of what we do for their SQL environments to improve performance. So hopefully that's maybe enticed you to spend a little more time thinking about what it's worth to sell our software. As I mentioned, you're going to receive both a Velocity 7.0 and Diskeeper 18 NFR for your use. We'll send you this deck, and here are the contacts for the folks across the world that'll help support you. And as I said, do, you know, from presentation on through software delivery, installation, et cetera, and dashboard review for your organization. And just go to the partner if you're not registered now. Register, and all of our webinar information, case studies, presentations, et cetera, are there for you. So again, folks, I hope that's helpful. And I think we can go here, GQ and Rick, to the questions that we've got. Trying to get up to the top. There seem to be a whole host of questions here. GQ, can you access those?
Dan, I can, and I'll take the first one here from Bill and ask Rick. Rick, Bill asks, when installing to an older server 2008 R2 box, IE9 may not be available. Without that, there's no way to access the console to enable remote access. Is there a registry setting that one could put manually to enable remote access?
Well, the console itself actually is the VMC console actually has its own web server. If that system is accessible remotely, you actually can use, or you can actually remote access that via a browser just from that address. The standard address, it's standard port 80, so all of that will work remotely. On the end nodes, you can go into the end nodes, and there is a configuration in the advanced configuration that allows you to enable the remote UI, and that will allow the software to listen remotely and accept connections. And on that, you'd need to know the system name or its IP address, and then we use port 13569 for the end nodes, and you just would type in, let's say, the name colon 13569, and that would allow you to access a direct EndNode directly and access the UI. But you do have to turn on remote UI on the EndNode if you want to access that directly as opposed to going through VMC. The VMC has its own web server, and it can be accessed remotely as long as the system is, as long as that system is set up with your firewalls and everything so that port 80 is available.
Now, Rick, one thing that I should mention with IE8, that may be the default on 2008 R2. The console should come up once with those settings, but the graphics in the analytics won't be available with IE8, I believe.
Right, and that is because the JavaScript library that we use to do the graphics itself won't work with older versions. It's just a function of the particular library that we're using to do the level of graphics. Just isn't supported in older versions. So you're right, Gary.
Okay. And then Edward, he asked, will the latest version of Velocity support disk health monitoring for SSDs? And Edward, we did not include that in Velocity, but this is feedback that we would really like. If there's a large demand for features like this or any features, please provide this feedback back to us, because we're always looking to see what the customer wants and needs for future versions there. Okay. Then David asks, besides IntelliWrite technology and RAM cache working to reduce I/O and make it smarter, is there also a background defrag or similar? And if so, is the technology in the SSD product you have in this as well? I'll take this one, Rick.
Okay.
David, yes, we do, because even though we are preventing much of the fragmentation from occurring, and we prevent maybe 90–95%, there may be some that we did not. So we in the background are doing defrag, but we're very smart about it now too. And also there may be some fragmentation already existing on the system before we install the product. So we may want to defragment those files. But we've become very, very smart or smarter in what we do. We're only looking at fragmentation that is actually causing performance issues. And if it's not causing any performance issues, we're not going to waste a resource to try to defragment it. And as you indicated, or asked, the same technology is in our SSD product as well, Diskeeper. Now, the defragmentation technology, when it detects a SSD, is much different than for the hard disk drives, because what we have found is fragmentation really doesn't affect SSDs in terms of reads as much as it affects the writes. So we will detect that type of storage and do a different type of defragment technologies oriented just for the performance of the SSDs. Okay.
Let me add a little to that too, Gary, in terms of the SSDs. So while what Gary said is basically true, one of the things we did discover when we actually worked with some of the earliest SSD manufacturers to do some specialized software for them. At the beginning, Dan talked about OEMs we'd work with, or there were a number of others as well. But what we discovered was, even if the SSD was able to service these requests, because you didn't have head movement, everything else, and it didn't really add a lot of overhead, the overhead to both the operating system in terms of the IOs moving through the operating system and the file system overhead became significant. So what we did for SSDs, and Gary said we noticed them, what we do is we say, okay, if we have noticed that this particular file is causing performance issues, and we have telemetry data that tells us that we're doing either sequential IOs or we're doing a bunch of split IOs as a result of stuff, and therefore performance can be a problem. If we notice that we have a particular file that's definitely causing performance problems, if it's an SSD, we don't try to defragment the whole thing because of what Gary said. We know that the SSD mostly handles that. We try to make sure we're not causing split IOs on the writes, because there are write issues specifically with SSDs for that, so we do mitigate that. But the other thing is we notice that if you have more than a certain number of fragments in a file, the file system itself, regardless of the background storage, has serious performance issues. So we will mitigate that level of risk as well on an SSD. But as Gary said, we try very hard not to do work we don't have to do. You didn't buy your computer to run our software. You bought your computer to do real work. And so we're constantly looking at how can we make the software more efficient, more effective, give you the most bang for the buck.
Thanks, Rick, and I agree with you fully there. And let me take the next question here. What does Velocity do that Diskeeper doesn't? This is from Gary. Is it applicable to a single workstation or exclusively to servers? Gary, in terms of features, both Velocity and Diskeeper have the same technology in it. Although the Velocity product was oriented more for the virtual environment, and Diskeeper is oriented more towards, your physical environment, desktops and servers. But Velocity also can be installed on physical servers or systems if need be. And Velocity also can, what we see, can be installed onto the VDI environments, and we've seen some good performance gains on there. So yes, it's applicable to both workstations and servers there.
And let me add another thing on that too, Gary. We did do one thing very special for Velocity that's different than Diskeeper. And earlier on, Dan in his presentation talked about the I/O blender effect, which really gets amplified on in a virtual environment. One of the things that we do is we have an algorithm. We have this technology called invisitasking. The idea of invisitasking is to make sure that our software isn't taking up bandwidth, either compute bandwidth or other kinds of bandwidth, I/O bandwidth, whatever. When you're actually trying to do real work, we try to back off. But when you don't have access to what's going on elsewhere, and rather than having our systems constantly talking to each other and in a network and all of that kind of bandwidth, we built an engine that actually figures out via implied performance. We actually track things, and we imply that we have conflicts on the other side, that somebody's conflicting with us and causing slowdowns. And it allows us to be better able to be a good citizen in the virtual environment. And so there's a whole level of technology that was built specifically for that purpose in Velocity.
And Rick, and that same technology is also in our Diskeeper, because we do see some similar things happening in our physical environments. Dan indicated that the I/O tax and I/O blender effect in the virtual environment. You also see that in the physical environment too. For instance, you have multiple physical servers accessing different LUNs, but different LUNs, but all on the same SAN. So you get that same sort of I/O tax and I/O blender effect occurring there too. So thanks, Rick. And Rick, I'll give this question to you next. Will one of these products help, and this is from David, will one of these products help with a LOB line of business app that has and uses MS SQL within its product? We use the LOB app. It uses MS SQL or Express, and I don't have control over it as it's built into the LOB app to use it as it needs to. Will this help?
Obviously, in specialized app situations, the final answer really comes down to give it a try and see what happens. As Dan pointed out early on, the no reboot thing makes that a lot easier. You can both install it, try it, and then if for whatever reason you decide to remove it, you can remove it. No reboots required. We have a lot of different technologies. The caching specifically can make a huge difference, but as was also talked, SQL wants to take over all of the memory, and we are a good player. We only use memory that's available. So if SQL is using it all, we won't use any. So if you have no control at all over how SQL's doing its work, all I can say is the best thing to do would be to really try it in that case. We have a great tech support group that would be happy to work with you. Our software solutions engineers are top-notch, and they'd be happy to work with you to figure out where we can get the best advantage. Some of our other technologies like IntelliWrite just tend to handle an awful lot of other issues. As long as I have the subject here, let me say one thing about our caching technology. So it was talked about how great it is and all that, and yes, it's great. The reason is we're not looking for, on your SQL environment, we're not looking for the data that SQL's trying to cache. Yeah, if you turn SQL's caching off entirely, will we take its place and take over its caching? Yes. But what we're looking for is all of that noisy I/O that's going to get in the way of your application and take that. That's why with a very limited amount of very limited amount of memory, we can make a big difference in the I/O pattern. And so we are able to make applications work better just because there's a ton of I/O that happens in a Windows operating system environment that has nothing to do with your application. And if all we do is take that out of the I/O stream, your application will run faster because it's not having to deal with other things. And so it's extremely likely that indeed it will. But at the end of the day, sometimes you just have to try it and then you get usually incredibly surprised at how wonderful it is.
Now most of our resellers may know this, but SQL is not very smart when it's how it allocates memory. It will just tend to try to load all its databases into memory, taking all of it, even though a lot of those databases aren't even getting accessed. So it's a waste of the resource. And what we found is if you limit the amount of memory that SQL uses and just gives some of that to us, we'll take full advantage of it and give the better performance gains back to you. And that's what we've seen here. And although we've talked about SQL, it's really, the reason we talk about it is it's one of our sweet spots because SQL is very I/O intensive and all the apps that access the SQL, but we're really agnostic to the applications. We're looking for anything that is very I/O intensive. That may be file servers, that may be Exchange servers. And anything that's I/O intensive, that's where we can give the performance gains back to you. Okay. Let's see. Let's see. Got a few more here. There's from David on the physical install, the LOB app. Oh, this is this one again, and Windows on physical hardware. Would love it that one of your products might help here, and which product? I would go, since it is a physical install and the physical hardware, I would, right now, David, I would recommend Diskeeper. But once you get, when the RVPs or the SEs and get, full details, they can help you on what the best product is. Okay. And then Gary asks, is Velocity a separate product from Diskeeper, or is it an add-in to Diskeeper? Does Velocity replace Diskeeper when using it on a workstation? And Gary, these are two separate products. Velocity is its own product line, and Diskeeper is its own product line. And what we do recommend is Velocity more for the virtual environment, and we're actually agnostic to the type of hypervisor. It could be Hyper-V, it could be ESX, so from VMware. So because we get installed on the actual VMs running Windows, So velocity for the virtual environment and Diskeeper for the physical. Let's see. And then David asks, please, difference between Diskeeper and SSD Keeper. If I have someone on Diskeeper and then they go all SSDs, does a Diskeeper product have all that SSD Keeper has, or is there a compelling reason to switch to SSD Keeper? For what and why? And David, both Diskeeper and SSD Keeper have the same technology in both of them. What we kind of do recommend, and you know, what we do see is we have customers that have a mixed environment, and on the same systems, they may have both SSDs and hard disk drives. In those cases, both Diskeeper and SSD Keeper will serve the same function. Both of them will have the same technology to determine the type of storage that is on those systems and apply the correct one. You know, one of the reasons, and you know this as a reseller, when people saw Diskeeper, they just thought defragmentation. And one of the reasons for SSD Keeper is to get beyond that old thought, because we're not just a defragmenter anymore. We do more than that, and that's one of the reasons for SSD Keeper. And if you're going, you know, straight on brand new sale with systems with all SSD Keepers, I would recommend doing SSD Keeper. Okay. Then Tree, hey Rick, I'll pass this one over to you, and he has two questions here. Would it help with SQL servers that use Flash, and then also rather than the SanDisk? And Rick, you may be on mute there, but I'll take that one there. Yes, it will help on the all-flash array, and because, you know, for one thing, by caching on the memory can be anywhere from 5 to 15x faster than SSDs. So you can see that, first of all, the speed of just the response times, but also we're eliminating IOs that have to go all the way down to the storage. So we're eliminating that there. And the one nice thing about this new dashboard is that the performance metrics that it gives you the actual IO time saved in your environment, and the response times, of course, is going to be faster with SSDs, and that takes that into account. We actually know what the latency is going to be, or the response times, and we'll give that actual figure there. Anything else to add there?
Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
I was just going to say there's a great case study, too, that in the example I used earlier at the University of Illinois, where on both their Oracle databases, and Darren, I know you asked about Oracle, and as long as it's running on Windows, we're good to go. But they saw dramatic, not only performance improvements, and they were already on an all-flash environment. They went from 4 hours to 1 hour and 15 minutes on the same Oracle report. The 4 hours was on all-flash. The hour and a half that it took to run the report was after they installed Velocity. So yes, dramatic improvements, but as Rick said, and as we all find out, the best thing to do is just install it and try it, because everybody's application is going to be a little bit different. And we're happy to help you do that. The software is free. Thanks to Rick, there's no reboot. Simple to do. Thanks, guys.
And another thing on that, along with that University of Illinois, part of why that is you still have a pipe. And the fact that we're removing the I/O before it even gets up to the storage layer in the operating system, much less before it goes out on the pipe and everything. Yeah, all flash is fast, and you're able to get a lot better performance. You don't have the latencies because you're not waiting for hard disks to spin and rotational latency and head movement and all that. But you still have pipes. You still have conflict with other systems. You still have all that I/O blender effect thing. And removing even if we only remove a small percentage of the IOs out of the total stream, it means that the pipe's a lot faster. It means you have a lot less weights, and the latency becomes a lot less. And that's why the University of Illinois was able to get that level of performance.
And Rick, because of that, you can add more applications to your existing environment because of that headroom reduction without having to add expensive hardware.
Right, and you can always increase your pipe and everything else, but the pipe's expensive, and that it removes all that. You just get a lot more potential bandwidth for more applications to be done on the same hardware.
Okay. And I see Tree has a question. How do you ensure that SQL database will not be corrupted? This is a nightmare for DBAs. Tree, for one, our caching is read caching only. And what that means is that the data that we have in cache is already on storage. So there's no, chance for data integrity issues, because that is one of our top goals, to make sure that the data integrity remains the same there. So, the data in cache, all it is when that data is read, and we're not, we're looking at data in blocks here. So when it gets read, and we can just read from cache, we're just satisfying from the cache, but that data is already on the disk there.
And Gary, along those lines, we specifically notice things like clustered shared volumes and stuff like that. If you're doing active clustering across multiple nodes, we back off. But if you're doing active passive, where you're doing failover, we're perfectly fine with that. We work perfectly fine. And so we look at those kinds of things that could specifically be a problem, because you're right, the last thing a DBA wants is to install something thinking he's going to get better performance, and now he's got data integrity issues. That's extremely important to us, data integrity.
Okay. And then Bill, this is still on the access with the Internet Explorer. He says he gets remote access, shows 403, forbidden until you enable remote access. Without console, you cannot enable remote access. And he says the console does not appear with IE8. You get an error saying it wants IE9. Looks like we're going to take it offline with Bill and figure this one out with him, Rick.
Yeah, we should get on a tech support call and look at the whole thing. The console itself should be accessible remotely via a more modern browser, just as long as that particular node's on the internet. But if for some reason that's not the case, we can debug it and figure out what's going on and get this solved.
And I believe Bill is already working with Brian, and I believe Firefox worked for him, but just not with Internet Explorer 8. So we'll get this figured out with Bill, with you, Bill. Okay. Now, Darren here, first question I'll take. He says, you mentioned SQL a lot. Is there a similar benefit for Oracle? And Darren, yes, there is. We mentioned SQL just because, as we found out through our survey, that's what most of the people are looking at right now with SQL performance. But we also have case studies and customers using Oracle getting similar performance gains. And then
let me say one little word about that, Gary.
Mm-hmm.
So without disparaging anybody, one of the interesting things is the way that Oracle implemented their cache versus the way that SQL did. So earlier on you say, we actually have a whole recommended how do you configure for SQL Server and stuff. Oracle's cache is configured in such a way that we can steal from their cache to do our caching without causing any performance problems for them. And it actually works really well with SQL. With Oracle. It works great with SQL, and like Gary said, that tends to be what our customers are using, but it works really fabulously with Oracle, and we don't even have to do the memory configuration because Oracle has a totally different mechanism they use for how they allocate their cache memory.
Yep. And then Rick, I'll give this one over to you. What is this from Darren again? What is the effect on backup solutions and transaction logging? especially image-based backup solutions for databases on VMs?
Generally speaking, our software has always worked well for helping with backups. In fact, oftentimes we find that in backup solutions, people's greatest benefits is the fact that their backups are taking a lot less time. In terms of transactional logs and stuff, the IntelliWrite technology works really well because transactional logs tend to be small IOs, and those tend to get split, and they also tend to, as the transactions get committed, the logs tend to go away, so they tend to be temporary. And IntelliWrite works really well at helping with those specific kinds of things to make sure the allocations are done as well as possible so that you don't end up causing split IOs down the road. You don't end up causing a lot of free space issues due to the temporary nature of the transactional data. So yeah, our software does provide benefits in those areas. It isn't something we go out touting because most people aren't savvy enough to really kind of get that that's an area they might want to do. But yeah, we definitely help in both of those areas.
Okay, thanks, Rick. And David asks, for VMware host that has Windows Server OS VM guest, do I put Condusiv products on each guest OS or one? Or are one of these Condusiv products a VM appliance running effectively as a VM guest that brings benefit to the VMware host system itself? David, our product actually resides on the guest VMs, and it's not required to put it on every guest VM. You can just put it on one of them and get the benefits. But we do recommend that you go ahead and apply it to all VMs on that host. And the reason why is, although you're, let's say, optimizing the I/O, reducing the I/O on that one VM, you still have that other VMs going, you know, with the I/Os going through that same hypervisor, and you want to optimize all of them at the same time to get the best benefits. Not required, but if you want to get the best optimization, you can, you know, you want to install it on all of them. And of course, one of the licensing options is a host license, and once you buy a host license, you can install it on all the VMs of that host there. Okay. Then Kevin asks, you may have mentioned this already, but are your products all compatible with the Microsoft Edge browser? And Rick, I've used the Edge browser and brought up the console fine with it.
Yeah, it actually was developed using Edge and everything like that. I actually like the Edge debugger, although I have to admit that from a developer standpoint, the Chrome debugger works really well too. So our goal is to support them all, the latest version of all of them. But so yeah, Edge is perfectly fine. It works really well with Edge, but I just tend, because of debugging purposes, to use Chrome.
Rick, I think we've hit all the questions there. So, I mean, this is great. You guys have been great. You're very interactive. We love this. And if you have questions later that you might think of, send them in to the respective REP, and either they or the SE will get them answered for you. And that, Dan, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, GQ, and we sure will. So we look forward to any and all questions from anyone out there. So please do, as GQ mentioned. Again, there is one question here that came in later here. And okay, so what do you have for Linux? So that's for Edward.
And right now, and Edward, we have looked at the platform for Linux as we get requests for it. Now, we just have not got enough demand for it. So as I indicated before, as you see this sort of demand for it, please send that in so we know what's needed and wanted for the customers. But right now, it's just for the Windows platform.
And I guess fair enough to say if it's a mixed environment with Linux and Windows, you know, with us optimizing on the Windows side, as Rick mentioned too, reducing I/O down to storage, it kind of helps everybody perform better. So we're a little, you know, we can do a little more for that.
Yep, it provides
so
more bandwidth for the Linux systems.
Yep. That's right. So thanks, everybody. Again, great questions, great interaction. Rick and GQ, thanks for taking time out to share, you know, your knowledge and what you've done to our partner community here. Folks, there'll be NFRs for both Velocity and Diskeeper 18, Velocity 7, you know, in your mail shortly. Again, happy to answer any other questions and quite honestly to work with you to help you bring this incredible technology to your existing customers and prospects. We look forward to doing that and happy to do that all week long. So again, thanks everybody, appreciate it, and look forward to working with you. Take care.
Thanks.